Welcome, Mr. Kenny Weiss. Thank you very much for taking your time. And I appreciate very much that I have the opportunity to sit down with you and discuss narcissism. It is a big topic. It is also a trend at the time, definitely. At the same time, there is a true core to the trend. The narcissistic personality disorder leads to suffering. People in the perimeter suffer heavily. There is a very clear difference between the narcissistic personality disorder, pathological narcissism, and the mainstream term narcissism. Let's get right into it. Kenny, what is the biggest difference? What is very important for people to understand when looking at narcissism? What is the difference between the trend narcissism, somebody maybe a James Bond, and an individual with the narcissistic personality disorder?
Well, the biggest confusion I've seen in the industry is there's a lack of understanding of codependency. And this is what's creating the greatest confusion is most people have only been educated about one side of codependence, which is the typical disempowered, what we think is the needy. They're very pleasing oriented. They give themselves away. They might even call themselves an empath or something like that. What people don't realize is there's a polar opposite side of the codependence scale, what's called the falsely empowered. And they look almost exactly like a narcissist. And people were vastly undereducated about codependence. We're all codependent, and it's a scale or a spectrum, and people are further out on the disempowered or further out on the falsely empowered, and the falsely empowered literally has the exact same traits. The difference, I did a video on this, the difference between the falsely empowered codependent and the narcissist. One thing to recognize with the narcissist is, I use an analogy. If you know America, and you know the weather in Colorado, it has 4 distinct seasons. So it has a true winter, a true spring, a true summer, a true fall. And so those periods can last several months, but they always change. Well, then you go out to, Arizona or Nevada, the desert. It might rain once a year. It is basically the landscape and everything is always the same. Well, that's the difference is a narcissist is pretty much always in that position. Very, very rarely do they move out of that dysfunction. The codependent can look just like a narcissist and display, all these different subtypes, covert, overt, everything. And those are the seasons. Well, what you're primarily working with there is a falsely empowered codependent, someone who's grandiose, somebody who's all or nothing, black and white thinking. They're seeking outside or other esteem, which looks just like the narcissist. They're very walled off, shut down, detached. They can manipulate from, they usually start off a relationship as being very intense and very present for you, but then they, pull back behind their avoidance. And so unless somebody gets highly educated on codependence, and the only person I've ever heard teach on it is a lady named Pia Melody. And it's my personal opinion that if somebody has not read Pia Melody's work, they don't know anything about codependence. And so most people are learning about codependence. Like I said, she's the only teacher I've ever seen. Everybody else just says this. And so they're missing that, wait a minute, what I'm dealing with is codependence, because narcissism itself is very, very rare. It's, really people who stuck. I mean, how should I say this? We all experience a narcissistic developmental stage in childhood. It's, usually around 2 to 4. It's healthy, it's normal. It's where we learn to individuate and become our own selves and learn how to pursue our life. Well, the narcissist gets stuck and they never leave that. And the falsely empowered, it's very similar. It's a disease of, codependence is a disease of intellectual and emotional immaturity. And so whether they are disempowered or falsely empowered, they're both stuck in childhood. And Pia Melody's book, Facing Codependence, to me is required reading. If you want to start to really understand, are you dealing with a narcissist or not? If you don't know about falsely empowered codependence, you're probably in most cases mislabeling somebody as a narcissist. And so that's the key distinction, is think of it like the weather. You might have several months of a certain behavior, but it's going to change. It's going to move in and out like Colorado. A narcissist is like the desert. It's almost the same all day, every day, days on end, years on end, with slight variation. And that's one way to start getting your arms around it. But again, the key is go learn about falsely empowered codependence. And Pia and myself are the only people I've ever seen teach about it. I have a ton of videos. I have videos about the difference, the clinical difference between the two, of a narcissist and a falsely empowered codependent. I've written about it in my books and stuff like that. So that's the first step, is I tell people, get educated on falsely empowered codependent before you label someone as a narcissist.
So when you say narcissism is very rare, what exactly do you mean with narcissism? What kind of narcissism? The characteristic, the personality characteristic of narcissism, the narcissistic personality disorder, pathological narcissism. What do you mean with narcissism?
It doesn't matter which pathology of narcissism you want to talk about. The inherent traits of a narcissist, of being a full-blown, in the desert, all day, every day, a narcissist, are rare, whichever pathology of narcissism you're talking about. And most often they have characteristics of narcissism, but what you're dealing with is a codependent that's moving through that scale of false empowerment and disempowerment. And so then people go, well, that's covert. Well, I lose track of, there's so many different terms now for narcissism, and I lose track of them all. But they'll go, well, there are all these kinds of narcissists. Well, what you're really experiencing most likely is somebody who's moving between the disempowered and falsely empowered codependent. And so it's just a lack of information on codependence that's creating a lot of the misunderstanding and everybody being labeled as a narcissist. I mean, I wouldn't disagree that with social media, that narcissism is on the rise. And the parenting style that's been promoted over the last half century throughout the world, it's on the rise. But it's not as what people are mostly experiencing is a deeper divide in the codependent scale, and they're confusing it with narcissism because of the lack of teaching about codependence.
What I'd say to the, when you said, if you're dealing with somebody that you would label a narcissist, it's probably something different. I'd say it depends on what the situation is. If somebody always, constantly is dealing with somebody with narcissist, with somebody that has a narcissistic personality disorder, then there is a difference. You just, like a magnet, you pull narcissists toward yourself. A big one critique that I have towards the niche of narcissism on YouTube or the teachings is that that's not a good thing. I don't like the word empath really, because it kind of signalizes you're good, the narcissist is evil. And also with the, when we're looking at the point or looking at the argument that maybe it's not a full-blown narcissist, but maybe somebody that is going through that stage, the narcissistic stage. In the end, I would say it doesn't really matter. What matters is if somebody is suffering and is constantly facing narcissistic behavior in other people, there's something about your own behavior. There's something about your own lifestyle, your own way of living that hurts yourself. And it does not help to constantly point your finger at other people. You're a narcissist. Are narcissists Do they behave in an evil manner? Absolutely. Is it right to feel that anger? Absolutely. But there comes a stage where the best thing to do is to let go of the anger, maybe even what is it called? To forgive, use forgiveness, and then start living your own life again. How do I go about living my own life and maybe even forgetting, moving past narcissism?
Great question. You bring up two, to me, very important things. You do not end up with a narcissist unless you experience childhood trauma and you're a codependent yourself. It's why you're attracted to them. It's why they're attracted to you. The message in the community that, of teachers teaching about narcissists is they paint the person. It is true, they were treated horribly and they were abused by a narcissist. But that doesn't happen unless you're stuck in codependence and childhood trauma. And so the lack of pointing that out, because they elevate this person as though you're just so sweet and kind, and they took advantage of how great you are. And that's telling them a lie. I'm not denying they might be sweet and kind, but they don't have internal boundaries. They don't, because there are 5 core symptoms of codependence: low self-esteem, a lack of internal boundaries, the inability to meet your own needs and wants, a detachment from reality, and an inability to express your reality maturely and moderately. And reality is basically truth. And so the person attracted to the narcissist is not in truth. They're not in reality. They don't see their low self-esteem, their lack of boundaries, their inability to care for themselves. And this is exemplified by the term empath. First of all, I'm not trying to disparage, but the lady who created the term empath, Dr. Elaine Aron, if you watch I did a whole video on this. I talk about this in my latest book, Your Journey to Being Yourself. She did a whole documentary on empaths and highly sensitive persons and how she developed the term. In the first 5 minutes of the documentary, she describes her childhood, where she was yelled and screamed at and filled with fear by her parents about swimming. They conditioned her to be scared to death of the water. And she then skips over how much childhood trauma is in that, and then says, well, it's because I was born sensitive. And so she totally misdiagnosed herself. What she experienced was severe childhood trauma, which she chose a disempowerment position, which is to become helpless, needless, wantless. That's, the typical side of codependence. And now she's promoting this whole term of empath. Well, what people don't realize is, think of how everyone describes an empath. They describe them as better than the narcissist. They're sweeter, they're kinder, more loving. Well, they don't even realize that that is narcissistic in itself. Now they've elevated them from the disempowered victim position. They're playing the victim, taking the victim role, but then elevating themselves above the narcissist, which is false empowerment. They're saying, I'm better than, I'm more kind, I'm more loving, and they don't. And again, it's because they're not to blame, they're not bad or wrong. It's the lack of teaching about how codependence works. And so both sides of the dynamic are in deception. They're out of touch with reality. And that's codependence. And then they're not expressing their reality moderately. And so they're taking either a one up or one down position, disempowered codependent or falsely empowered codependent. And this is why the whole genre, everything's confused, is because there's a deep misunderstanding and mislabeling of what's really happening. And so there's no such thing as an empath. You're not born highly sensitive. That is a result of childhood trauma. And that trauma can happen even in the womb. There are studies, MRI studies, that when a woman feels stress, which could be from a husband who's left, who's not working, who's an addict, who's abusive, the DNA and the structure of the child actually changes in pregnancy before they're born. Well, there's trauma. The child is already soaking in all the chemicals of fear, which then they would say, well, I was born this way. I've always been this way. Well, that's because your parents were stuck in unhealed childhood trauma, acting that out on themselves. They're both codependent, and those emotions, created your genetic and DNA structure. And so, yes, you came born more disempowered with all of the unresolved trauma from your parents. But that doesn't make you, there's a difference between empathy and an empath. Somebody with empathy, I can keep containment. I can experience your troubles. I can hear you talk about the pain you're in. And I can draw from my own life experiences and feel my own pain that's like similar to yours. And so, but I'm contained. The so-called empath sucks in all of that. Well, that's a codependent who is without boundaries. They don't have an internal boundary structure because they were raised by two severely codependent parents. And so again, when it comes to these dynamics, there's just a grave misunderstanding about what childhood trauma is and what codependence is. And so, again, if you don't have these deeper understanding of the dynamics, you're not going to get the help you need. And so your final question was, what does that person do? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to, gather new information. And so I always, Pia Melody has 3 books: Facing Love Addiction, Facing Codependence, and Intimacy Factor. It's my belief that those 3 books should be required reading of every person on this planet before they ever have a child and before they ever even go on a date. They are that important because nobody's teaching what she's teaching. And she's, has her own treatment center. Like, she's, for whatever reason, her stuff hasn't exploded like everybody else's, but she's been around for decades, and she's highly accredited, and so you need that information. The next thing is you need to get into childhood trauma recovery work, codependence work. Well, that's my platform. Like, my own life struggles were, I married physically and verbally abusive narcissist who was also sociopathic and borderline personality. I went through horrific things in my own childhood and all of this. And I chased all the big name teachers and I was stuck. Well, it wasn't until I then started researching, how the brain develops and what it does, the neuroscience of emotions and trauma. And, basically just had and then how emotions work. And so my platform, it's similar to Pia Melody's. I'm talking about stuff nobody else is talking about. Well, if you don't know the things that I teach about how to recover, how to reshape your emotions, how to heal your childhood trauma, you're going to forever be, and then you stay stuck in that empath model and that victim model of the disempowered, and there's nothing I can do. I call it purgatory, emotional purgatory. You'll never get out of it. And so I teach 4 things. Remember what I said, they're out of touch with the reality. They're out of touch with truth. Well, I teach truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. And so we have to get into truth that, wait a minute, it is true that this person was abusive to me. And it is also true that I have unhealed pain in me that created my attraction to them, that allowed me to be in a relationship. And so that leads to step 2, responsibility. I have to take responsibility that out of the billions of people on this planet, I chose this person. It didn't randomly happen. They didn't trap me. They didn't, the reason they seduced me is because I have unhealed childhood trauma and codependence. I have to take responsibility. Well, by doing that, what do I have to do? I have to do the healing work on myself. And once I do that, I can forgive myself, because the reason we can't forgive the narcissist is we can't forgive ourselves and the part we played in it. But we're detached from reality and everyone's saying, oh, it's the narcissist. Well, you'll never forgive the narcissist until you can forgive yourself for the part you played in the mutual destructive dynamic. Like that's what I had to do with my ex-wife, was realize, oh my God, my childhood taught me to search out because I was abused as a child. It taught me to be attracted to somebody like this.
Mhm.
Wow, that's about me. I also had to take ownership of how I would manipulate and control her. And this is what happens. The person who gets attracted to the narcissist gets in a relationship, they manipulate and control the narcissist just as much, but they do it from the victim position. I had to take ownership of that, of how I did that. And the way we do that is we make ourselves helpless. Like, here's an instance. In 10 years of marriage, we had 5 instances of intimacy. And so intimacy would be any type of compliment or kind word, any type of non-sexual physical touch like a hug or holding hands, and then sexual acts. All right. So in 10 years, we had 12. That's it. Well, every time I never stood up for myself. I never said, hey, we need to go deal with this and talk to a counselor. Instead, I would try and do things that she wanted to manipulate her into sex. And when it didn't happen, then I'd pout and throw fits. Like I was trying to manipulate and control her. I wasn't being nice to be nice. I was trying to get something from her. I was trying to control her. Here's a person who's struggling with their own intimacy issues. And then instead of asking for my needs and wants or setting boundaries and going, this isn't working for me. We need to see a professional on this. Instead, I stayed in the victim position. We'd be out in public and I would passive aggressively tell people how we don't have sex. That's manipulative and controlling. That's abusive, just like the narcissist. But that's the problem. We don't want to admit our side. We don't want to see that. And nobody's teaching that person that they need to look at how they're doing the exact same thing, but from this position. And that to me is heartbreaking because these people are abused, but they don't realize that they need to do some work on themselves if they want to get free.
I know exactly what you mean. I would like to add, though, that there are different ways of being. So it's not just narcissist empath. There are different kinds of narcissists. There are different kinds of people that bind themselves to narcissists. It could even be a narcissist. There can be two narcissists in a relationship, maybe a grandiose narcissist and a covert narcissist. That the way the other partner will deal with the abuse from the narcissist can happen in different ways. That
Yeah.
the passive aggressive way in social situations may, for if anybody's listening and thinking, no, that's not how I deal with that, that may not be the case. But at the same time, there's always a bit of not being honest to the person.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not in truth.
In a strange way, I find it almost unfair. And I know people listening will think, how can you even say this? And I would like to say, you are very direct in your teachings, let me say. At the same time, I definitely want to give you you have more subscribers than I do, so it doesn't make sense to say I want to give you the platform. But at the same time, I think it is a very important topic. So I may not agree with everything you say. At the same time, it is a very important topic to get out of there and also touch upon exactly what you say. How to get out of there. The one thing that many people in the niche of narcissism don't touch upon, which I personally also think is a problem, because it makes money. It generates money. Narcissism is a trend. People will tell the victims of narcissists what they want to hear. What
Yes.
happens
They're
is,
preying on them.
exactly, they say, and I have one, it's a German channel in my mind. They say, I'm not going to say the name, but they keep saying, you are strong. People that are used by narcissists are strong and empowered, and that's why they're used. You may be strong in certain areas, but there is definitely how would you say it, a hole in your armor. There's something how
Yes.
a a person with a personality disorder. Those are people that have a disorder. And if you bind yourself to somebody with a personality disorder, it may be, I Googled this, I think this is maybe the correct translation, you may have the anxious avoidant personality disorder, which goes hand in hand when you say that those people also aren't in touch with the truth or with reality. They may notice the narcissist is pulling me into his or her deranged reality. At the same time, it happens. You let it happen. It is a very hard pill to swallow to say, yes, I let it happen. And it doesn't have anything to do with it's your fault. And how could you? It actually has to do with once, it's exactly what you said. Once I accept that, and then I can forgive myself. If I push it away internally, I can never forgive myself because I don't even know what I am forgiving myself for. And I would also add to the point, I forgot it, but then it couldn't have been so important anyway. To the point, why do people not want to accept certain, I mean, it's in the question itself, actually, certain hard pills to swallow? Why is it so difficult for people to leave in Germany we would say the devil's circle, to leave this chain of events that keeps happening? I have a friendship with a narcissist. Everybody around me, I feel, is a narcissist. Why is it so difficult to get out of there?
Well, that's something I wrote about in my first book, and that's called The Worst Day Cycle. And really, the inability to accept the truth that they played a part in it is a shame dynamic. So both the narcissist and the person attracted to the narcissist are in severe levels of shame. They were told directly or indirectly that they had no value or worth. And so as a child, the person attracted to a narcissist was not acknowledged. And there could be abandonment, there could be enmeshment, there could be emotional and physical neglect, but their inherent value and worth was neglected. And so they grow up with the identity that they aren't worth anything, that they're less than. And so when, this is what teachers do, they say the narcissist sucks you in. Well, that only happens to somebody who, as a child, was never given proper boundaries, was never validated for their worth. And so this person is looking for validation. That's why they get sucked in. And that's shame. Now, what created the narcissist was severe shame. All right. Like, they're so detached, they're gone. This person can actually get help. But to admit that, here's what happens in the first 7 years of life. We are in a theta brainwave state, which is the exact same as hypnosis. So people don't realize that the first 7 years of their life, they are basically sucking in all the intellectual and emotional trauma from their parents. Their brain wakes up, they've developed this unique maladaptive coping skill, what I describe as a false persona, and they think it's them. This is me. This is my personality. I've always been this way. Well, true, but you were trained. What you saw was a family dynamic where, wait a minute, I have to give myself away. I can't stand up for myself. I have to take on somebody else's reality, because that's what a narcissist, they're brilliant at changing your reality and getting you to accept their truth and their version of the world. Well, that's what you went through in childhood. Well, why does somebody not want to deal with that? Because what are they going to experience? Shame. Oh my gosh. I'm 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 years old. I have to admit that I developed a false persona, that my parents weren't as loving and kind as I thought. That, oh my God, I already felt neglected, abandoned. My value and worth was never validated. Now I've got to face that truth. It's too much. I don't want to do that. So there are 4 stages to the worst day cycle. Trauma. We all go through trauma in childhood. It's unavoidable. Parents are human and perfectly imperfect. They can't be there for us at all times. If you went through divorce, if they're the simple little things is
Is it
trauma.
trauma then, though?
Oh,
Because
yes.
trauma
Yes.
is when it's life-threatening.
No, see there, and there again, there's the problem. People think trauma is only something big.
That is,
It's not.
maybe there are two different definitions in English and German, because in German or in Germany, and I know this because I spoke to therapists about this, and that's a reason why it's difficult for people that have had narcissistic abuse in the past to get the PTSD, because trauma must include something where your life has been threatened. It might be different. In Germany, that definitely is the case. I know that for a fact.
Yeah,
It might be
that's
different in America.
incorrect teaching. Trauma
No,
is
it's not.
any
It
event.
might be different in America. It definitely is true in Germany. I know that for a fact.
Well, what I'm saying is this is the problem with the mental health field is some people will classify trauma as it's only trauma if it's life threatening. All right.
It's a
And
definition
so it might
thing.
be true that that's how they define it in Germany. What I'm saying is that's a inadequate definition of trauma. Trauma is any event that the child experiences either disempowerment or false empowerment. So here's a perfect example. I was reaching into the refrigerator to grab cottage cheese as a child. All right. I was hungry. My mom comes running and screaming over, no, 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 no. That's for the dogs. So under your definition,
It's not my
nobody would
definition, though.
classify that. I mean, the German definition, not you personally. All right. But the definition you shared, how about that? They would not classify that as traumatic. Well, here's the message, and this is why it's traumatic. In that moment, my mother's energy, I sucked in all of her shame, all of her fear. Here's why my mother screamed at me. First of all, my mom was on a budget. She had a spending problem. She would buy clothes and things like that. And so my mom would always run out of money. And so my mom's afraid anytime we'd eat, my mom would have a reaction because she was afraid she wasn't going to have enough money to keep groceries in the house. All right. I didn't know that. I was just a kid. I learned this later. Okay. The other reason was she used the cottage cheese to hide the pills that she'd give our dogs when they were sick. Well, as a 10-year-old child, here's what I heard. If I eat, I get in trouble. If I eat, mom doesn't love me. And oh, by the way, in our house, we feed the dogs before we feed the child. So here's what happened. For the next 30 plus years, I hardly ate at all. I played pro sports. I played professional hockey. I would live off of a super big gulp of Coke. And I don't know if they have ding dongs in Germany, but they're these, chocolate cupcake things. That's it. If you'd ask me to eat, I'd say, no, I hate it. It's boring. There's the false persona. I believed I was a person who didn't like food and hated to eat. No, I had to, because of the shame that's called induced shame. My mother was feeling shame about her inability to run the household. So she dumped all of that into me. I swallowed it up. And so I developed a codependent shame dynamic where I starved myself for the next 30 years. I wouldn't eat. But I thought it was my personality. And this is what's happening to the person who's attracted to a narcissist. Something simple like that. Or when I'd ask my dad for help with homework and he'd go, oh, okay, what now? Boom, right there. And he was an engineer. And once we got into like calculus and theory of math, I'd struggle. And he'd go, Kenny, don't you see it? All my life, all I've ever felt is stupid. Both of those are severe trauma. But people, and do you see both of them disempowered me? I lost my authentic self. I lost my ability to meet my needs and wants. I couldn't feed myself. I gave away my truth and my reality. I'm not stupid. I lost internal boundaries. I accepted the identity of somebody else and their feelings. Well, no wonder I married a narcissist. And it's these deeper understandings of childhood trauma, the fear it creates, which is an emotional chemical addiction to repeat the emotional experience of shame. So there are 4 stages to the worst day cycle: trauma, fear, shame, and denial. And then we go into denial. So I've just described the first 3. Trauma creates the fear reaction. We create a shame identity. And then we don't want to admit the truth that we're playing a part in this and that we have a false persona. So we go into denial. They're the problem. And now we experience a new set of trauma that replays what we went through in childhood. The narcissist abuses us just like childhood, and we just stay stuck on the cycle.
I'd like to get into the point of trauma because I come from physics, and to me this is very easily the solution here is very easy. It's completely definition right now. What is trauma? So it doesn't really matter whether people say it is trauma or it is not trauma. It's purely what does trauma mean? Does trauma include life-threatening, I will die right now, or
Yes.
extreme rape, for example?
Yes.
That would be, at least in Germany. And this is something that for me personally, at the beginning, when I started getting into psychology, was very confusing for me. In physics, there's something, it's called the SI units. It's from French, but the standard, international standard units. All over in the world, when looking at physics and math, even in the US, they will use kilograms, for example, millimeters. Those are the standard units. Everything in physics is completely defined. There is no room for misunderstanding. It is absolutely defined. In psychology, different countries use different definitions. I know that, for example, the US has the DSM, something like that.
Yeah.
There are different definitions, and some definitions aren't very extremely clear. So the question here is, what exactly is a traumatic experience? What definitely happens is you experience something in childhood that has a severe negative impact in how you process your surroundings thereafter and how you deal with life thereafter.
Yeah.
And also it is, for the most part, subconscious. I would like to get into the point of the false persona, because I would say when I would also say that there's one way of dealing with severe narcissistic abuse in childhood, which is not really having any persona at all, or needing somebody to tell you what your persona is in order to have the feeling of an identity.
Yeah, that's the detachment from reality. That's the codependence. And this starts with what I call the attachment authenticity bind in childhood. Every single one of you, I can show you how everybody's been through childhood trauma. I'll do that at the end here, okay? But I want to describe the attachment authenticity bind. There are 2 things we need as a species, every human. We need attachment. We will die unless we physically and emotionally attach to another human being. This was discovered when they put babies, I think it was Poland. I always forget Poland or Russia. I get it mixed up. They took all these children who were orphans, put them in cribs, never held them or anything. They all died and realized, oh my God, we need intimacy and connection. So we need to attach physically and emotionally to another human being. The second thing we need is authenticity, the pursuit of our own morals and values, needs and wants, negotiables and non-negotiables, our own view of the world, our inherent power, basically who we want to be in the world. Well, look at what happens in childhood. Do you see the 2 examples I gave? Cottage cheese. I had to make a decision. Do I want attachment with my mother or authenticity? Authenticity would say, I need to eat. Food is good for me. I have to take care of myself. This is an inherent need and want of me personally. But wait a minute. If I choose authenticity, what am I going to lose? Attachment. My mom just shunned me. No, you're a bad kid. Don't get food. My dad did the same thing. in the way he expressed his emotions regarding I was asking for attachment. Dad, can you help me? All exasperated, rejected my request for attachment. So now I have to go, okay, wait a minute. How am I going to survive? Well, I'll drop my authenticity. I will stop asking help for my dad. I will now have no needs and wants, no truth or reality. I'll accept whatever you want, Dad. Sure, I'm stupid. I will never make a request of you again. Hopefully, then you'll pay attention to me and love me. And that's what happens to all of us. Simple little things. Dad, can I, take the car? I mean, look at what happens to children when they're 2 years old and they're scrambling all around, crawling, and they get near the stairs. The parents run over, yelling and screaming, no, no, no. Because of their own fear, right then they transfer it into the child because they've lost it. They're afraid. Wait a minute. If my child falls down those stairs, yes, I want to save their life, but it would also reflect on me as a parent that I'm bad, that I let that happen. Since they're caught in their own shame, they can't put an internal boundary around that and just come over lovingly and go, oh, I know that looks fun, but let's go this way. Instead, they go into, remember, trauma, fear, shame. They experience that right there in those simple moments. Okay. Now, for anyone listening who might have the definition of trauma that it's only severe, I'm going to show you that that's a false premise and false teaching. Anytime
It
you
can't
have
be
any
false, though.
emotion,
It's only definition.
What's that?
It's only definition, though.
Yeah, but I'm gonna show how it's a false definition, how it's incorrect.
There is
That
no, but
trauma
then
needs
looking
to
at that
include,
definition means there is no false definition, because the definition means I assign this meaning to a specific word.
and what I'm saying is they've created a definition that is faulty and doesn't assign every aspect of things that create trauma. It only assigns these certain actions, and they need to expand these actions to have a complete definition. It's an incomplete definition of the word trauma, is
Definitions
what I'm
are
trying to say.
arbitrary, though. Definitions are arbitrary. They're arbitrary, though. So definitions are made. For example, in psychology is a very new science. 100 years ago or so, it's completely arbitrary. This is trauma. This is what is defined as. So there can't really be a false definition. Some people
Okay,
decide
then
it,
what would
and the
you
rest of
define
the
it
world would
as?
use it.
What would you define what I just described as? Since what I hear you saying is that for you in your reality, this is codependence. We're getting into a reality argument. In your reality, trauma can only have this definition.
Not
Okay,
true. Not true. That is not true, though.
well, then what I just heard you say is it's defined by this. Did I mishear you? Can you give me some more information? Because maybe I'm mishearing you.
So what I'm saying is, in the end, that I don't I don't have a definition. I take the definition of trauma from psychologists, from the leading psychologists that are maybe in the field of psychology, not in the world, but in the countries, because countries have different definitions.
Sure.
So I just take the definition that psychologists in academia use, and I can
Okay.
fully accept if there's a different definition in the US, fully accept, okay, I understand. In the US, trauma is differently defined. Now I know, though, that I'm working with a different definition. So I'm fully fine with different definitions. And just the fact, though, that technically speaking, there can't be a false definition
I
unless,
see
for
what you're
example,
saying.
looking,
Okay, I
if we're
understand
in
what.
I just want to give a quick example. If we're in the room of real numbers and everything is predefined, and then saying I mean, technically you could even do that. I define 4 equals 2 plus 1. Um, you can define anything however you want, technically speaking.
I hear what I'm learning about you as a person is you're very precise with definitions. And so the word false is that, and this is how language works. And we all put our own definitions on things. And so when I use the word false, in your reality, the world is black and white. This definition includes
I
these.
can't go with that though.
Just let me finish, please. Please hear me. I allowed you
But,
to share
but I
your
can't
reality,
go
but
when you say
but
my
let me
world is
finish my
black and white.
reality. Let me finish my reality, and then you can hear that we are on the same side. I'm just explaining what I'm hearing from you, okay? But I misused the word false because it denounced this as untrue. And so I made a mistake by using the word false. This is a true definition of trauma, severe acts of abuse. I agree with that. I think a better term for me to have used would have been, while this definition includes an aspect of trauma, it's limited. Trauma is bigger than that. It's not just severe acts of abuse. It includes all of this other stuff. And so my definition of the word trauma is that it includes every aspect of trauma, not this limited perspective. And so that would have been a better way for me to have a use of language, is instead of calling this false, it's not false. These are all examples of trauma. It's limited. It doesn't include every act of trauma. Because I agree with you. You're right. This is a true definition of trauma. What I'm offering is that it's limited. It doesn't share every aspect of trauma, and every aspect of trauma itself is much bigger. Now, as far as, experts' definitions, definitions change over time. They expand. I mean, at one point, all the experts thought the world was flat. All right. Then we learned the world was round. We defined the world this way. It had a true definition. And so what I'm saying is, while it may be true at one time, psychologists and psychiatrists define trauma as this, it's now expanding because we're learning more about, wow, these simple little events are just as traumatizing as these. There isn't a difference, because look at the long-term impact of my mother yelling at me about cottage cheese. That created a severe traumatic reaction. I starved myself for decades. That is a severe trauma reaction, similar to somebody being raped or punched or whatever. And that's what we're starting to understand is, whoa, trauma is a lot bigger than just this. It's these simple little things over here too. All of those are traumatic. So trauma is now starting to be understood as any event that then creates a negative adaptation throughout life that persists throughout life. It's not just this. And so what I'm describing are, this section over here, and this is why people won't get help from a narcissist, is they don't know that these simple little things in childhood, that's trauma, that they need to heal from that. And that's what's keeping them keep chasing the narcissist and staying stuck and inability to forgive, is they don't have this understanding. And trauma is much bigger than this.
I understand. Um, the one point where what I want to say is, it's not that I see the world black and white. I am very definitions are very important. I just come from the field of science and physics, so they are just strict. It is important to have, when having a science, it is essential to have strict definitions and strict rules.
I agree.
So when looking at and this for me personally just is confusing. Coming from physics, going into psychology is confusing to me to redefine a word. I don't see it necessary. Why don't we say, and I get that it was simply because something isn't in the category of severe abuse near-death experience, and severe sexual abuse, that is trauma, we could also categorize it as something else. We could use any word here, a different kind of trauma. So why redefine a word? Why not maybe have a higher word to classify it? Because I feel that just it confuses when these things evolve through time. So, for example, when looking at physics, we have one theory, we have Newton's theory. Any theory we have right now is incomplete because we don't know what reality is. We don't know where reality comes from. We don't know what the essential building blocks of reality is. So any theory we have right now, even Einstein's theory, is incomplete. When we have new information, we build upon the old definitions. We don't well, Einstein actually did redefine impulse. Um,
And that's what I'm doing with trauma. Look, the first book on psychology wasn't written until the 1870s, and it really wasn't until the early 1900s, because the church back in the 1500s told, not Genet, oh, I wish my brain, I wish I was like Jordan Peterson. He remembers everybody's name, and my memory just isn't as good. It's on the, hopefully I'll remember it. But in the 1500s, there was an attempt to start going down the psychological landscape. The church said, no, no, no. We'll give science the ability to, you can pursue science, but nothing emotionally, because that's our purview. That's, we want people to turn towards God and not go to psychology. So that's why the first psychology book wasn't written until the 1870s. So I love the analogy you just brought up. We are in the infancy stages of really learning about trauma and nurture and how impactful it is. I mean, look, you're in Germany, but at least in America, psychology and any of this stuff was never discussed until really the 1970s, when, TV talk shows like Oprah, Phil Donahue, where people actually came on TV and started talking about their life history. So I use this analogy. When it comes to childhood trauma, when it comes to parenting relationships, literally our world is so underdeveloped and undereducated about all of these dynamics. It is similar to, we haven't even discovered that the world isn't flat. We haven't discovered tools or fire. That's how early psychology is in its development of these processes and understanding. And so I like what you just said. These definitions can't be distinctively pigeonholed, because we're learning more and more about how, in the last 20 years, we've just learned that your genes don't define who you are. There are certain genes that, it will define male, female. But as far as personality traits, it all depends on the environment, the emotional environment it's put in. And so that's why narcissism isn't a genetic predisposition. You might be predisposed, but it depends on the nurturing environment, whether it activates. Same with cancer, all these health issues. That's, we're chasing all of these health issues as though they're biology, when in fact, they're all about childhood and the experience of your childhood that you went through. So the definitions are ever expanding, because really in the last 50 years, it's been socially acceptable to even have discussions like this. You never talked about it. It was never brought up. People coming back from the First World War, going through PTSD, having violent reactions, they were just sent to insane asylums. They just thought they'd gone mad. Like, they totally diminished them. There was no concept of trauma. They didn't even think men having their legs blown off and everything they went through, they didn't consider that trauma. They thought there was something weak in that man. Well, look at how much that definition has changed. That, trauma is classified as something severe. Well, in the early 1900s, it wasn't even called trauma. So it's an ever expanding landscape in psychology, because we're learning so much more about how the brain and body works when it comes to emotions and experiences. It wasn't until the last several years, the whole theory that we're born with emotions is wrong. It's been debunked. It's not even true. Emotions are concepts we learn in childhood. And so any emotions you're having as an adult, all you're doing is reliving your childhood. That's it. And so that's why everyone's in trauma, because if you're mad at the narcissist, the only reason you're mad at the narcissist is you learned a definition of what that word and what that behavior was in childhood. And so you're projecting your unhealed trauma onto them. It's true they're being abusive, but you're reliving your childhood through them. Again, all of these things are expanding. So I'm open to a new word, a higher word. I love that idea. All I'm trying to get across is your theory is exactly right. All of this isn't purely defined. It's growing as we learn more and understand more. And so many of these things, while I can be guilty of it, of pigeonholing and saying this is what it is, maybe a better way of saying it is this is what it is based on what we know now. But most likely it will change as we learn more.
I understand. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. So that because psychology is new, on the other hand, doesn't work with math. It's not they I think I definitely think it is possible to combine psychology with math and have mathematical definitions. So that definitions, it's hard to have exact definitions. On the other hand, I would say that what does pigeonholing mean?
Oh, yeah, that's a American term. So what that means is you're taking any topic and you're fitting it into this spot. You're going to force it into that. You're going to make it fit, and it may not fit, but you're going to be restrictive and say it has to be this.
But how are
Well,
you pigeonholing by looking at exact definitions?
well, I think where we landed was an agreement that just like, Einstein's theory is expanding and growing and we can't define it, so is psychology. And so there are certain aspects of psychology that we can't, that are ever changing and being redefined in the land, because as we learn more, we realize, oh, wait a minute, we didn't know that this was going on. And so now that we've discovered it, we need to adjust what we originally said was going on,
Mhm.
versus going, ignoring that and pigeonholing and just going, no, it's just this. We're going to ignore all this new truth. Nope, it's just this.
Well, but that's not what I'm doing, though. I'm just looking at definitions that not I have made, but that are in place. Because otherwise, it's just chaotic if everybody has their own definition. So I don't consider it to be pigeonholing. I just see it to be exact so that we're all on the same wavelength. And I just have to say that Einstein's theory isn't growing and evolving. It is set, but it includes Newton's theory and expanded his theory basically. So it is set with strict definitions. So in the end, with the definitions, it's important for me because otherwise we don't know what we're talking about. So we will be
Okay. Well,
talking
how would you
away from each other.
how would you say when we have a definition and we learn new things, what would you want to do with it? Because I hear that you want a definition to be consistent over time, otherwise there's chaos. Okay, I'm fine with your reality. What if we discover that there's something that wasn't included, that we weren't aware of? What would you say we should do then?
Mhm. Um, there are So it's probably not completely, so we can't completely take the way physics works into psychology, because then the way physics work is there's one theory, somebody sets up a theory and it is fixed. Somebody else can come along and set up a new theory, and that is then also fixed. So I would say that first, in all the countries come together and have international definitions. So when there are people from different countries discussing, that there isn't that barrier there, and that in all as one, we'll look at a definition. And so when we have trauma and say, okay, maybe other things play into this, we could say, okay, we expand the word trauma and make it public so everybody knows, okay, trauma, this is trauma, or we say we leave the definition trauma as such and say we'll take another Greek word and
Yeah.
say this, what is actually above this, what combines sexual and near death and other things that nonetheless have the same effect or near identical effect compared to what is severe trauma. We have a different word. So
Yeah.
it's just to bring a little structure. Um,
I don't mind structure. I mean, I'm open to any and all of that. And in America, some people, those examples I gave, some people call that little trauma. And the examples you gave of rape, abuse, some people call those big trauma. To me, since both have the same long-term effects, there's no difference between the two. They both are devastating. I mean, I know the devastation of what many people would call little traumas. They've wreaked havoc throughout my life. And I've been through abuse as a child. There's been no difference in how they've impacted me. Every single one of those has had the exact, well, I don't know if the exact same, but they both had devastating impacts on my ability to form relationships with myself, with others, all of these things. I'm open to your suggestion of a consistent term. Um, that's a reality I can accept. We're not at that place. Um, you know, and so if you want to keep your, see, so I hope you pick up the way that I'm talking to you. This is what codependence recovery looks like. So did you see as we started to not hear each other correctly? If when I and I still get in my codependence, when I get in my codependence, I could have gone falsely empowered and doubled down on how right I was and argued with you. Instead, did you see what I did? I paused and went, okay, wait a minute. My value and self-worth isn't tied to whether he has the same truth and reality about this is. All right. So I kept my self-esteem. That's core symptom number one. I didn't let it get tied into whether we agree or not. And then I put boundaries around, okay, wait a minute. We hear things differently. My goal as a listener isn't to be right and get him to think the way I do. My goal as a listener is to understand him and hear how he uses words and what's important to him and ask questions to further understand what would you like? How would you do it? In other words, I'm trying to learn about your reality. Well, this is what happens between the narcissist and the person attracted. They fight realities. They go at each other because they're both also codependent and they're out of touch with it. They both have low self-esteem. They don't know their needs and wants, can't set boundaries. They lose touch with the reality and they can't express it moderately. And so what I just demonstrated is what codependence recovery looks like, is I'm allowing you to have your reality. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I mean, I'm going, okay, and then I would take your reality and ask questions about it because I'm trying to learn about you. You get to have your reality, even if I disagree with it. And so a person, the way you don't get sucked into a narcissist is when they gaslight you and do all that. If you have codependence recovery, you can go, well, that's interesting. So you think yesterday I went outside of the house naked and went across to the neighbors and flirted with them. That's an interesting reality. Tell me more. How did you feel about that? Whereas, they go, no, I didn't. They're going to argue with it. Well, there's your codependence. And so to me, this is why codependence recovery, if you don't have it, if you don't know about false empowerment and disempowerment, you've got no shot with a narcissist. And so, that's why to me, I love when people so-called disagree with me or have a different reality, because it gives me a chance to model what healthy moderation and maturity looks like. And that's what we don't have. And that's not what narcissism teachers are teaching people, is this is what it looks like. And so I'm open to all of your suggestions. I'm open to being, that I know there are several mistakes I made in words. I was lazy with my words and put assumptions on you that were incorrect. And, you called me out for those, which I appreciate. Like, you're not being black and white. That was my falsely empowered codependent telling you who you are and what your reality is. Like I saw as soon as you brought that up, I went, shoot, I lost containment. I lost my boundary. Why did I do that to him? I just pigeonholed him. I told him who he was. Well, I don't know that that's true. Like that comment, when you brought it up, it made me realize, oh God, Kenny, you're losing containment. Where's your self-esteem right now? Why do you need his approval? Like I did all of that work inside, and then I was able to regather myself and go, oh, okay, I made a mistake there. I handled that incorrectly. And so now I'm taking ownership of it and making amends and going, okay, but do you see how I was able to regather myself and get myself out of, because when you started to disagree with me, or it wasn't really disagreement. We just were trying to figure out what the other person is saying. Really, I don't feel that we were disagreeing. It was we're trying to understand each other's worldviews. But in that moment, I was reliving my childhood trauma of you're my father telling me I'm wrong. And so I got falsely empowered to defend myself and, point the finger at you. And that's what happens to all of us. But because of, the emotional authenticity I teach, all these things I've learned and taught, I was able to regather myself. Now I can take ownership that, I made some mistakes in the way I spoke to you. And, what I teach is what an amends, not an apology. My amends to you is after this, I'll do what I always do. I'll sit down and break down our conversation and I'll look where I was imperfect and I'll put a plan in place to address my codependence in those areas so that I'm less offensive. Because when I did that to you, I was offensive to you. And that's what I was immature and offensive. Well, that I'm responsible for healing. You don't have to change. I have to get into truth. So I have to hold the mirror up to me. Then I have to take responsibility of, yep, I did that, do the healing work. And so I'll put a plan in place around that. And from there, I can forgive myself. Whether you forgive me or not, I have no control over. But I can live in peace that I've acted. I call that the authentic self cycle. This is how we remember the attachment authenticity bind. This is how we recover those 4 steps: truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. And that allows us to live maturely and moderately. And we can have these discussions and be able to identify a narcissist and not get sucked in.
Well, I appreciate your words, your very honest words, and I would say it's almost bound to happen to have disagreements because this
Yeah.
field is so new, and it's and because in the field of psychology the definitions aren't very clear, and I also think that for the audience it is exciting when there are
Yeah.
disagreements because we can really figure out, okay, what do we actually mean? What are we getting at? And we go back and forth, and the listeners will see
Yeah.
both positions. But yeah, thank you very much for your
Yeah.
kind and
And when
honest.
I'm mature and moderate, it can be a really healthy discussion because my self-esteem isn't tied to whether you agree with me or not. I'm just learning and open to ideas. I have a chapter in my latest book about, I never want to be right. Being right is a problem because do you see, like if I tried to be right with you, if I went down that road, it would have gotten really ugly. And this is what happens to narcissists and the one they're trying, everyone's trying to be right. So they're basically claiming the victim position. You have to accept my truth, and if you don't, you're abusing me. Well, relationship can't happen. So when I start to notice that something's going off, I back off and go, wait a minute, what's their truth? What's their reality? They get to have it. I can disagree with it, but I don't have to fight about it. I can just learn about it. And that creates connection, intimacy, understanding of, wow. So we look at things. I mean, my estimation after going through that is, we look at a lot of the things the exact same way. How we process it is a little bit different. That's okay.
Mhm.
Not a problem.
I would,
That's the advantage of codependence recovery.
mhm. Yeah, a very good demonstration as well. And I would like to add to that with everybody has different truths.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
this might be a pet peeve isn't the right word, but a habit of mine to try to analyze how can we expand, how we can go further. That there is the truth, and there are, let me go with the word, different interpretations of the truth. So
Mhm.
um, I'm going from everybody has, and also again, a definition right now. So everybody has their own truth. I'm gonna categorize that as everybody has their interpretation of the truth, and it is then problematic. For example, when we're dealing with people with the narcissist or individuals with the narcissistic personality disorder, that they don't have their own interpretation of truth. They have completely different realities. They will
They
say
do.
the sky is green, and they
Yeah,
try to pull you into. Then they want you to have an interpretation of their reality, which
they
is
do.
then we have a personality disorder when it's not an interpretation of reality anymore. It's a shift. They interpret their own reality.
They do. But I'm responsible as to whether I give myself away and allow somebody else's reality to change mine. And so, like I said, our conversation is a perfect example. Our realities were getting misunderstood. And so instead of me doubling down and trying to force my reality on you, I backed off, I contained myself around my reality and started to learn about yours. And so
Mm,
that's the problem. The person attracted to a narcissist doesn't do that. They want to argue. They get sucked in to that alternate reality because they have to be right. Well, that's just as narcissistic as them. And so what you have is severe codependence going on.
how do I find a balance between standing my ground and getting caught? Because sometimes I would argue sometimes it is important to stand your ground.
Well, I thought you stood your ground very well. You shared your reality perfectly fine. And, I stood my ground. I don't feel I gave myself away. I went by backing off and getting back into maturity and moderation. I was able to see, oh, wait a minute. I lost containment. I misinterpreted some things he said. In essence, we're kind of saying the same things. But you have a not biology, a science background that I don't have, and so certain things are very important to you because of that knowledge. Well, I don't have that knowledge. I haven't gone down that road, so I'm not going to argue with you because I don't have the knowledge to argue with.
Y-
Like I'm just like, okay, I'll learn from him. Like, I guess it'd be like, am I going to go up to a sushi chef and tell him about sushi? And I've never made sushi. Like,
mm,
no, I'm just going to listen, but I don't feel I'm giving myself away.
mm,
You have an expertise in that area that I don't. Well, there's nothing for me to argue with, but
mm,
I'm not giving myself away. I'm just, saying, well, I hear you, but I don't know enough about the topic to agree or disagree,
mm.
And so I know for me, when I have information coming into me, the first thing I ask myself is it true for me? And and that's how I keep myself from getting sucked in. If if what they're saying isn't true for me, I do not argue realities unless I've lost containment. But when I'm mature and moderate, if they think the sky is green, I just go, huh, tell me more. I don't demand that they see the sky as blue because my demanding they see the sky as blue is when that means I've lost containment and now I'm in codependence. I'm right back in childhood. I'm in
Mm.
the attachment authenticity bind. Well, I don't give somebody that power over me.
I would then take that question and distance it from our, I wouldn't even call it from our conversation in general. How, if I have this past narcissists in my life, how do I find the uh, equinox, I think is the right word, equilibrium, which that's way too fancy. How do I find a, how do I find, how can I balance not getting caught into the false reality of a narcissist and at the same time stand my ground in certain positions? So how can I tell how can I stand to my own, to myself and not get caught in the fingers of a narcissist? Do you know what I mean? Could I somehow bring across
Yes.
what I'm trying to get?
Yeah. What you're talking about is the attachment authenticity bind and how we all had to give up our authenticity. We had to drop it for attachment. And so we think we're this person, but we're not. Well, that my whole program, my latest book shows how that happens. And it's because we've lost touch with our authentic selves and who we really are, what we really think and feel, what we really need and want, what's negotiable and non-negotiable for us. We don't know what that is. And that's why we get sucked in. So until we do that healing work and reclaim our authentic selves, yeah, it's going to keep happening because you don't know the difference. You don't know, is this my reality or is this theirs? Well, you have to go back. Basically, it's been my life experience, which doesn't make it right. Every single person on this planet is detached from their authentic self. Every single person has been through what my definition of childhood trauma, and they are codependent. And so we all need to go back and reparent ourselves. And that's what my whole program is. One, shows why I think that is true and lays out the science of here's how it happens. And nobody's immune from it. Doesn't matter what country you're from. Here's how you then, act that out as an adult, but then here's the recovery process to swing back so you can stop all of that.
I would say that it is, everybody has their authentic self. The goal is to somehow locate it, to get close to it, but it is impossible to completely live your authentic self because then you would instantly go to jail also, I would say, because you would then act out just completely who you are in the Stone Ages. Okay. But there's a society. So I would say that as soon as there's a society, you have to somehow adapt to that society. Um, how do I find my authentic self after it has been taken away from me?
Well, I just wrote a book that's 400 pages on how to do that. So I can't really answer that question. It's very deep and involved. There's a lot to it. I will agree with you that nobody will ever achieve reclaiming all of their authentic self because we're human. We're limited. We are always imperfect. And so just like me, for decades, I've been working on myself and I lost containment. I'm human. I'm limited. I'm going to be codependent at times. I'm going to detach from my authentic self, fall right back into my childhood, put my parents' face. That's just that's the life journey. But the basic answer to your question, the simple answer is it requires four things: truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. Each layer of those is very involved and how to get in truth. Look, studies show the average human lies to themselves 10 to 200 times a day, which, just think, if you ever posted a picture online and you edited it, that's a lie. It's not the authentic picture. You just create an image out of it. When someone asks you, how are you doing? And you say, fine, but you're actually depressed, you just lied. Like, we lie nonstop. And that's a detachment from authentic self. And so, we have to learn what truth looks like. We have to learn what responsibility looks like, healing and forgiveness. Well, as I said, I've written a couple of books and developed classes and thousands of videos. It's a very deep, multi-layered process that
Mhm.
a person can decide if they want to go on that journey or not, and it's up to them. I allow
Mhm.
them to choose their reality and what works best for them.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
just so you know, I have to leave in about 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. Then let me wrap it up. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for being here. Appreciate your time. And also, we had a different opinions, but that is important. It is normal. It gets also
Yeah.
audiences to see, okay, what are we individually trying to get at? Thank you for your openness. I think if that's
Yeah.
a word.
I appreciate what I learned from you. You have a background in science that I just don't have. And I really appreciate how precise, I mean, you want to be, because I think there's a lot of value in precision and less gray area. That many things need lots of precision, or it is chaotic. And, you're not reckless with your words. I can be reckless with my words. I just get all excited, and so a couple of times I threw out words that were reckless. And so I appreciate your grace in, the way you handled how imperfect I was and gave me the space to catch myself and then take ownership of, oops, I lost containment there. And I thought we were able to gather and have a great conversation with different realities that was mature and moderate and respectful of each other. And so I appreciate you for that.
Wow. I am flustered. I don't know what to say. Um, but yeah, let me I can only say I found it was a very deep, interesting conversation. Um, thank you very much for being on the show. And for anybody listening, I hope it was interesting. Take care,
Yeah,
stay strong,
yeah.
and see you next time.